In the last episode of Games Britannia, we looked at how far back games reach into British history, how they were used to explore the cosmos, challenge destiny, promote imperialism, and upset the social order. Forget all that, it's history. It's time for some fun! This is the story of the golden age of Games Britannia, when games of chance were combined with games of strategy to create what we recognise today as the modern board game. These were games designed to be played by children, families or adults who had leisure time to spare, who wanted something gently challenging, socially engaging and essentially fun. But behind the scenes of domesticity lies another story, a tale of wartime intrigue, terrorism, the growth of affluent America, and above all else, 200 years of political struggle and turmoil. Modern Games Britannia was born in 1810, just a few years after William Blake had lamented the spread of dark satanic mills across our green and pleasant land. Industrial growth, urban poverty and child labour were new features of a changing landscape, which led, for the first time in history, to a legal obligation that children under the age of 9 should go to school. And it was a game that was deployed to entice them in.
To him who makes peace shall be joy.
5, 2.
It was called the Mansion of Bliss because that was the game's objective, to reach a place of virtuous ecstasy.
All those who are round fighting must pay a counter to every player.
But this was no airy-fairy paradise. It was a fine Georgian house, a fitting destination in a period when the home and the family were becoming an ever more important focus of life.
Oh gosh.
10. The Mansion of Bliss came out during the explosion of board games that bombarded families in the 18th and 19th centuries. Patriotic and improving games aimed at helping the middle classes navigate the treacherous social and political waters in which they found themselves. Games like Royal Regatta, with a teetotum to replace the morally dubious dice, it took players on a sea voyage around the Isle of Wight, awarding points for passing close to the British fleet and a bonus for coming alongside the royal yacht Victoria and Albert. Historical Pastimes was a game that took young Victorians on a tour through Britain's past to show how the lessons of history could be painful and sometimes lethal. Very sorry for you. Like these other games, the Mansion of Bliss was a simple game of chance.
This relates to the last one, actually, I think, a bit.
But every time you landed on a square, you had to read out a little homily which revealed whether you were to be rewarded or penalised.
You have to wait 3 times. I know, that's pretty nasty, actually.
And in those homilies lay the message of the game.
Then to school you may straight away proceed.
Well, I think you'll find that's a big, big advantage. It just shows you how good it is going to school. Can you
It
see
was the message of the liberal reformers who wanted to bring education to the masses in the face of opposition from the establishment.
No, she is rich. Oh no, I don't think it looks good. 22.
22.
It doesn't look good.
Swearing.
3.
Yes.
1, 2. Mansion of Bliss. Who enters the Mansion of Bliss will have cause to rejoice at his claim. So well he travelled through life, he has happily ended the game.
I have really enjoyed it. It's strange reading poems and then finding out what it's going to be instead of just looking at the square and saying, like, don't move until next 3 goes.
So, there you have it. The kids like it. Even the Nintendo generation. Perhaps that's why the Mansion of Bliss spawned so many imitators. Games like this one, the Mansion of Happiness,
Same basic game, same basic design.
The blurb in the instructions for the Mansion of Happiness called it the new game of virtue rewarded and vice punished, for the amusement of youths of both sexes, designed with a view to promoting progressive improvement of the juvenile mind and to deter them from pursuing the dangerous paths of vice.
One big difference. This one was made in America. It was the first commercially successful game to be published in the United States, helping to create an industry that would soon overtake not only Britain, but the rest of the world.
With the Mansion of Happiness, Britain had given the game away. For a young America steeped in the nonconformist traditions of its Puritan founding fathers, a game like the Mansion of Happiness wasn't just straightforward moral instruction. It set out a political creed on which they could found a nation.
So many of the early games in America were morality-based. People liked playing that kind of thing. Parents liked teaching their children through games the proper way to behave.
And so was built for us a mighty nation, mightiest in the world.
The success of the Mansion of Happiness popularised board games in America and showed what they were capable of doing. Once the industry had gained a foothold in the New World, games became a way of expressing the American dream, as important as journalism and popular novels.
Tell me about how this kind of book became a sort of inspiration for some of the games that came out in the late 19th century.
Well, Horatio Alger was very prolific, and he wrote about poor children who were trying to survive, taking whatever jobs they could find. This is a telegraph messenger, and the books were so successful that the game companies would follow suit and put out a game with a similar principle. And this was the beginning of the rags to riches idea of life in America. And the games became more economically oriented.
By the late 19th century, America was caught in the midst of a social whirlwind. Industrialization and new railroads heading towards the western frontier led to economic expansion on a scale never before seen. It was uncharted territory in every sense. A young printer called Milton Bradley personified this pioneering spirit, and in it he saw an opportunity to revolutionise the games we play.
Bradley recognised that in the turbulence of the new America, social and economic upheaval were fashioning a new game of life, and people needed some help learning how to play it. So he came up with this. The checkered game of life. It broke the mould. In his version of life, virtue is no longer its own reward. What you're after are things like influence, ambition, industry, and wealth.
4. We haven't had a 4 for a while.
No, we haven't. I don't think we've... So that's
so
two...
1 or 2.
Side to side? Up or down?
Up or down.
Bradley had taken the British idea of a moral journey and modified it with American themes of opportunity, choice, and individualism. But he added something else, something new, an element of choice in a game that had previously relied purely on chance.
Sorry, 1 is up and down.
2
is side to side. 3 is diagonal. 1 space.
The ability to decide for yourself in which direction you wanted to move echoed the type of decisions you might make in your life.
No, just gives me some points. I don't want points, really.
That's the strategy you chose?
Oh, right, okay.
You're stuck with it.
4.
4. We haven't had a 4 for a while.
No, we haven't.
So I can go back to matrimony, but I think here we go. Industry
takes you to wealth.
And that's the 10 points I need.
You've
50.
Got 50.
Now I'm headed to the happy old.
Okay, this is the final.
He invented this game in 1860, and the success in marketing the game came from his selling the game during the Civil War in a small version that soldiers could take with them. Basically, it became the first travel game.
1.
1.
Which means you can move up and down 1, is that right?
Space.
Bradley had hit on a winning formula. His was a real rags-to-riches story. The company bearing his name, MB Games, lasted from 1860 until 1984, when it was sold to Hasbro for a fortune. Bradley had invented the first commercial blockbuster board game as we know it today. He had taken a timely and appealing theme and added a new way of playing, what is known in the trade as a game mechanic.
I always think that the ideal game is the game where the winner thinks he's won because he's been played it skillfully, and the losers feel that they've lost because they had bad luck.
How simple should the game be, would you say?
Well, the simpler the game is, the better it is, really.
2. There's a 2 there.
Right.
Nobody wants to listen to a great monologue on how to play the game.
5. I don't want to go up because that's the road to ruin.
Simple and intuitive, I'd say.
Sideways.
Yeah, 2.
1 or 2. You have a choice of the 3.
So that when you're planning your move, the strategy becomes maybe not totally obvious, but a little obvious, and you feel that you're making intelligent decisions.
Here's the 400. I have 100 points, and I've reached happy old age.
Congratulations,
thank you very
old
much.
man.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for a very good game. It's surprisingly good, actually. I enjoy it. It's quite quick.
There are elements in it that are unique.
Yeah.
It's just amazing for the time period.
The development of Games Britannia had stalled with the Mansion of Bliss. The Americans had seized control of the game. Bradley's invention had shown the huge commercial potential of board games in the emerging consumer age. And the checkered game of life revealed something else. It revealed the subtle, almost stealthy political role that games can play. In the years leading up to the First World War, Britain was undergoing a period of radical political turmoil. In 1909, this apparently conventional race game began to circulate among the households of Britain. Its strange, slightly saucy name, Pankerswith, in fact encoded a radical political message. It represented the escalating battle between Emmeline Pankhurst, leader of the women's suffrage movement, and her arch-enemy, Prime Minister Herbert Asquith. The aim of the game was to get a woman into that bastion of male oppression and exclusion, the Houses of Parliament. Her path was strewn with obstacles such as imprisonment and ridicule, and opportunities such as financial sponsorship and public support. Each player had to pick their way through this political minefield.
I think games, they're ideally suited for exploring current events, and particularly very difficult and complex subject matters. And it sets up a conflict around a table, but a safe conflict. You're not having a political debate which can turn personal. You're having like a staged conflict, and it's through that you come to a resolution.
Women's suffrage wasn't the only political issue to find its way onto a game board at the beginning of the 20th century. A modernising Liberal government had come to power, seeking to sweep away old-fashioned Victorian attitudes. In their way stood the House of Lords, hell-bent on preserving their traditional land-owning interests. This conflict now became embodied in a pioneering new board game.
This game came about at a time of tremendous political unrest and fighting for social justice.
Who's that? That seems to be Lloyd George.
Clearly Lloyd George, waiting to pounce really on the iniquity of land ownership after the People's Budget of 1909.
Lloyd George's so-called People's Budget was intended to challenge this imbalance of power. It was proposed by the Liberal government with the specific intention of redistributing wealth for the first time in history. Not surprisingly, it had to be watered down to get through the House of Lords. But one particular issue it raised became a cause célèbre. This is the game Brer Fox and Brer Rabbit. It's now long forgotten, but at the time it first appeared in 1913, it was at the heart of a fierce debate over an issue that was tearing apart the political establishment: land tax. This is a political game that we're playing. We're entering a sort of political dimension by playing this game.
Yes.
Okay, well, let's have a go at playing it then. You start, Antonia. Yeah,
right.
you can start.
Okay.
4.
So 1, 2, 3, 4. So I can buy Solway Fisheries for
500 quid.
pounds.
Right, and that means if you or I land on it, we have to pay Antonio rent.
Yes.
Right.
I've become a landowner.
If you go a landowner. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Dottyville lunatic, that's bad. That's you're fine.
There was a strong feeling in the 19th, early 20th century that there was a lot of hereditary madness amongst the aristocracy, and particularly the big landowning aristocracy. And it's interesting you can buy your way out of the Dottyville. I think there may be a hint there that if you have enough money, although technically you should be incarcerated in a lunatic asylum, you can buy yourself out.
Way out.
So this is promoting basically the idea of a land tax or land value tax, I think is a more technical description of it, which is the idea that you tax land, not wages, instead of people. Which means, of course, big landowners, like we've got Lord Broadacre's estates here, they're the ones who, with their vast quantities of property, are going to be hit.
Firstly, it's showing you the inequities of land ownership and the way in which land is parcelled out by unproductive, non-productive landowners who dominate Mother Earth.
Right.
Mother Earth.
Yes.
And secondly, it's giving you a bit of a sense of how a single tax on land could rectify some of these issues.
Imperial taxes. I pay a £50 tobacco duty to the public treasury. Now, the public treasury is interesting because, of course, it's distinct from the bank, and this is, in a way, wealth to be distributed evenly among the people, isn't it? Yes, I see. Oh, now that's interesting. You've actually landed on the Daily Mail offices.
Fiercely patriotic, fiercely anti-liberal and anti-land tax. And I assume this is a kind of in-joke, actually, at some level. You can see how much they own, but also you can also fear landing on the square that belongs to the Daily Mail, which is what I've just done.
Yes. Okay. They chose to use a game to spread their idea, which many people would regard as a rather trivial thing.
To create political discussion within families, within community.
It was such an extraordinary period of political change, wasn't it, this first decade of the 20th century? It was almost as though Britain was standing on the threshold of a really big period of change which could have gone in two very different directions.
Well, Virginia Woolf said that the modern world began in 1910. And I suppose when she said that, she was thinking about some of these new issues. You really do feel that the modern era is breaking open,
forged,
if you like,
isn't it? Yeah. Anyway, so in order to find out who the winner is, we apparently add up the amount of money we got, and the person with the most wins. So I'm 1,300.
No, I've lost.
1,530.
I think that's a decisive win to Antonio, actually as a result of owning the most property on the board. So well done to you, and thank you very much. By the end of the First World War, Britain was a changed country. Women had won the right to vote, and ideas like land tax were abandoned as the nation concentrated on the mission to reconstruct itself after the devastation of war. As a game, Brer Fox and Brer Rabbit faded into obscurity. But what makes it so significant in the history of Games Britannia was its unexpected role in inspiring the game that would conquer the world. Brer Fox was one of a family of games created by one inventor, all of which use the same mechanics of play. In 1933, a games manufacturer in Leeds was sent something remarkably similar. It was a game also based on property acquisition, but instead of the landscape of Edwardian England, it was set around the streets of Atlantic City in America. He took it home to try out on his children, with a view to licensing it.
Well, the items are so marvellous, the little hotels and houses. And then these little metal trinkets, which Darrow, the inventor, is supposed to have taken from his wife's charm bracelet. We were immediately captivated. And then, of course, there was the money. So we had the ingredients for a great game.
One of the very first transatlantic calls secured a license from Parker Brothers in America. The rest is history.
There's one game that outsells all the rest, the most popular board game in the world. Monopoly. It was invented 35 years ago by an out-of-work heating engineer in Philadelphia, Mr. Charles B. Darrow.
Well, actually, no. If anyone deserves the credit, it's this woman, Elizabeth McGee Phillips. An American social activist, she had pioneered the use of games as a political tool. She was behind the design of the British game Brer Fox and Brer Rabbit, and also an American version, which she called the Landlord's Game. Commercially, the Landlord's Game wasn't a success, but enthusiasts began to produce handmade versions which circulated among church groups and university campuses across America, often adapted to the locality where they were played. It was one of these copies that Charles Darrow spotted in Atlantic City and transformed into Monopoly.
Well, I mean, here we've got a Monopoly birthday card, when just shows how popular Monopoly went. But if you hold this up beside that, I mean, there's no question that there's similarities, are there?
Monopoly was copied directly from the Landlord's Game. There's a go-to-jail space, there's property, even though it's not for ownership, it's for rental, tax spaces and utility spaces. It is the same game. It was invented by Elizabeth McGee Phillips. She was a Quaker, so the idea was not to make money, but to educate. And she was a believer in the economic principles of Georgian economics, basically a distribution of wealth. The rich were getting richer and the poor were not getting a chance to rise above their station. And producing this Landlord's Game, she was trying to show the folly of having monopolies. But what's fascinating about what happened to this game is that people fell in love with the idea of all the property ownership and creating the monopoly and bankrupting the other players in order to win. So the success of this game, which turned into Monopoly, was actually the reverse of what Elizabeth McGee Phillips was trying to set out to do in the first place.
The key feature in both games turned out to be an ingenious and revolutionary innovation that Elizabeth McGee Phillips had worked out.
It just goes round and round and round. It's a kind of race game that never ends. And the key which makes it possible is this conception which Elizabeth had for the first time, that it was possible to own a square and charge rent on it and all the other wonderful activities that come as a result of it. And that transformed the mechanism of a race game into something totally different.
And in a sense, the success and victory of Waddington's game Monopoly reflects the victory for speculation, for a speculation-driven property market.
But the game that Waddington's had licensed was based on the unfamiliar streets of Atlantic City. To be marketed in Britain, they decided to change the location to London.
How were the names on the Monopoly board chosen?
Well, my grandfather, with his London secretary, went round in a taxi. They wanted to make sure the streets were conjunctive, so they're all close together. Although there are a few mistakes. For instance, they got Marlborough Street, and it should have been Great Marlborough Street. And they did Euston and Pentonville Road, and ended up with a drink of tea at the Lions Corner House, the Angel Islington. And by that time they'd reached the end, and so they chose the Angel Islington as the last one. And nobody ever says that it's not a road or a street. Countries like New Zealand and Australia and South Africa all played the London board. And when people came from Melbourne and Sydney, for example, and they say, oh look, it's Piccadilly, they immediately felt at home, because they'd seen these places named on the Monopoly board.
It's a journey that ends here, at the most expensive and exclusive property of all, a Mayfair hotel. Today, it's also the location of the UK National Monopoly Championships. It's hard to think of a place further away from Elizabeth McGee's original dream of a more equal society.
No wonder the game was such a hit in 20th century Britain, a place where we've always preferred to talk about property values rather than politics. No wonder it's found such an enduring place in our cultural history.
images around the game are fascinating, particularly the top hat. I mean, the top hat shows just how big a reversal there'd been, because for radicals, the top hat was the image of the monopoly industrial capitalist, Mr. Fat, as he was called in the 1890s, and he had a waistcoat with a dollar sign on. By the 1930s and 1940s, when monopoly takes off, that's the aspiration. I mean, everybody wants to be the top hat.
In the world of Monopoly, this is the sacred turf of Wembley. Only in this case, it's the deep piled carpet of a hotel conference room.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Sorry. 1, 2, 3.
Conditions are intense. They're playing for real money and a place in the World Championships in Las Vegas. Here's a chance to find out what makes the world's most popular board game so compelling.
I think because everybody still, at the end of the day, enjoys winning and losing money. I think it's strictly that. And to a lot of people, the idea of having houses and hotels and making money is very appealing.
And this is the board they're playing on. It's hardly changed at all since it was first introduced in 1936. And why change a classic? It's absolutely beautiful. It's a work of art. It's simple, clean and bold, a bit like the London Underground map. And in fact, the two came out at roughly the same time. However, there are a couple of crucial differences. In particular, they've introduced this, the speed die. This speeds up the game considerably. And as a result, it lasts between 45 minutes and an hour, and the emphasis comes on trading, deal, dominate, die. That's the order of the day.
Whilst the championship goes on around me, I'm going to play the game with some die-hard Monopoly fans and give the speed die a go using tournament rules.
You could sell me Vine Street, and I would give you need a bit of cash. I'd buy it for 300.
I'd buy it for 350.
I'd buy it for 400.
Okay.
That gives me the distinct feeling I might have overspent there a bit, but...
Oh, that was a good investment.
Thank you, yeah. I'll have 16, please. That was worth it. And the other question is, why is this the most popular game in the world ever? Any theories?
I think the fact that it's adaptable so that each country or each city can have their own thing is quite an appeal for that. So people in London like having the London properties, and like you have the Berlin edition and that. But obviously there's more than just that.
It's something to do with the gameplay, isn't it?
You can incorporate real life situations in terms of trading, business-wise, how you manage money, how to negotiate with other people. There's a lot to it in terms of how to manage your money and stuff like that, really.
Yeah. Economic realities, really. But
it does. I have to say, one of the things that's nice is the cash, I think. It's nice having cash. Anyway, okay, let's proceed.
Oh, yeah. I know an Italian historian of the game who once told me that, in fact, before Parker Brothers really launched it, it was test run in MIT or somewhere by an earnest group of people in white coats who had to play Monopoly for a week to make sure that the balance of money in the game would work. And so the thing which was released, in fact, was the culmination of careful planning. Whether these people were ever let loose on the world at large afterwards, I never found out.
Okay, what's it now? If we land on your hotels, your posh hotels.
£1,000. 950 or 1,000. Okay. Where am I? 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
It impacted immediately. It was a runaway success. And here's somebody who received it and liked it. And that was Winston Churchill.
So this is a letter acknowledging.
He's just saying thank you very much for the game of Monopoly, which seems to be a very serious undertaking.
Indeed it was. Within 2 years of Winston Churchill's letter, Britain was at war, and Monopoly was called upon to play a quite unexpected role.
We were asked to produce silk maps sewn into the uniforms of airmen in case they were shot down, provided maps for escaping from prisoners of war camp. And then, of course, they had the idea of laminating them into the boards of Monopoly sets. And the Monopoly sets were also supplied with compasses, files, all sorts of other things, and were specially identified with a dot in free parking. So these were sent off to places like Colditz. And when we had a rally about 15 years ago, we had some of the Colditz escapees who genuinely remembered these maps and other pieces from the Monopoly sets and genuinely had made their escapes because of the Monopoly sets.
9. 700, please.
And it looks really catastrophic because I think you then have to go to there, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant! That's horrible for him. Oh, isn't it terrible?
That's what the man does. That's the impact of the man.
It is. It completely changes the gameplay in an instant.
40-50.
I haven't got 600. Can't help you out with that.
No one can help him out, then you get to the copy.
Looks like I'm gone, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
We're bankrupt. Okay. I don't know if I want to. This is so scary. One move and you're out. That is astonishing. You were leading. You were clearly leading, and now you're out. Well, there you go. What an amazing...
With disaster only a dice throw away, it's not surprising that rows started breaking out across the room.
I'm sorry, you just said you were mortgaging. You can't change your mind. I got 2 and 2. 2 and 2. He hasn't mortgaged.
What it did was to turn into a device in which the avaricious meanness of the human psyche is encouraged to flare up into savagery and violence in any normal household.
Yes, you have.
What are they then?
Capitalist lot, you've got houses on all the road. Turn them over.
570.
Yes, you're now learning the economic factors of life. 570.
So in our house, for example, we have a term called monopoly rage, which is what happens when somebody gets stung 7 times to repair their hotels and stands up and kicks the board over and runs out the room saying, I'm never playing a board game with you again in the rest of my life. See? And in our house, if we don't get that result, it's a failure. And this game is somehow structured in this way to convert perfectly normal children into vicious animals by making them mean and nasty and horrible. And because of that thing and the worship of money which underpins it, means that it's gone over the world like the most amazing ivy.
2 players have already been bankrupted. I'm left with 1 other player.
I will, while I have an opportunity, buy 3 more houses.
We're both low on money, mortgaged up to the hilt.
Right, so you've totally skipped over my houses, all of that investment wasted.
But my opponent has more properties. All I have are the yellows.
You're back on Leicester Square. You've done Leicester Square. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. 800.
The speed die has worked. My opponent is on the brink of bankruptcy.
500, and then sell a bit of property, I'm afraid.
After just 45 minutes, the game's almost up.
5, 6, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's it. That's the end of the game. By some miracle, I have to say, I seem to have won it. Thank you very much for an extremely exciting game.
Thank you very much.
Whilst I triumphed at my table, the championships continued late into the afternoon. After 8 hours of play, the 32 contestants were whittled down to the 4 finalists, one of whom would become that year's British champion. Next stop for John Broomfield was Las Vegas and a crack at the World Championship.
What does it feel like?
Terrific. Terrific.
What do you think? How do you think you managed to pull this great victory off? What do you think were the turning points in the game?
It's an element of good fortune and skill. And you can say that about life generally. You know, we all go through our lives and we all need a lot of luck. At the end, we get luck sometimes and maybe you don't spot it. And that's particularly so with Monopoly.
The balance of skill and luck was the secret that the 12th century king of Spain, Alfonso X, had written about in the Book of Games, his extraordinary compendium of medieval game-playing. Backgammon was his ideal game. The right combination between skill and luck was the key to Milton Bradley's breakthrough American game, the checkered game of life, that kick-started the US games industry. And it was the same heady mix that was now going to usher in the golden age of Games Britannia, when Britain's most successful board game was invented, Cluedo. It was during the Blitz that a solicitor's clerk from Birmingham, Anthony Pratt, came up with the idea whilst on factory duty. Fearful that the constant blackouts were damaging the country's social life, he devised a game that would be played by families when life returned to normal. The game he came up with was originally called Murder, and he brought it to the attention of Waddingtons in 1945.
Along came a game called Cluedo. I do remember it as being thought to be a winner right from the beginning. They really did sit around the board table playing the games, and their general feeling was Cluedo is going to be a winner. Let's give it everything we've got.
It's been on the market for over 20 years and has the ingredients of all successful games. It requires luck, a moderate amount of skill, and a spirit of competition.
Like a good Agatha Christie novel, Cluedo captured that very English notion that beneath the sheen of good manners lies a murderous intent. The player is a detective trying to solve a murder set in a country house. The board depicts the rooms of the house with weapons and characters represented by models, but the deduction of the murderer is played out using a deck of special cards.
Cluedo is a very peculiar board game because, to my mind, it's not actually a board game, it's a card game. The only purpose of the board, as far as I can see, is to delay the playing of the cards, because you can't challenge somebody and get information from the cards until you've reached a particular room. But nothing else actually happens on the board. Part of its success was due to the fact that it came out at the right time, because detectives were all the craze.
Sometimes get it right just simply almost by telepathy. It was a completely new idea, novel idea by a very clever inventor. And I think that's why it succeeded.
Back at HQ, Dave from Surrey has cracked the case and goes on to the national finals.
I'll try and do the best for everyone here. It's only a bit of fun, but I'm chuffed to win.
Cluedo was one of the few games since the 1830s that Games Britannia had successfully exported to America.
Introducing the all-new Clue. Imagine you're a celebrity at a party everyone's dying to attend, when suddenly, well, someone dies. And it's your job to discover where, with what weapon, and especially who did it. You might think it's Mustard, a bully with an axe to grind, or the manipulative Scarlet, a pretty face with a poisonous heart.
It launched a global Cluedo industry, though not every aspect of the game's peculiar Britishness translated easily across cultural borders.
Discover the secrets.
But the most important thing they did was to say, we cannot possibly have a reverent green. The American people will not countenance the fact that a man of the cloth could possibly be the suspect in a murder case. So they called him Mr. Green instead of the Reverend Green. I think we should have been tougher with them and said, no, it's got to be the Reverend Green. But we weren't.
In fact, that very adaptability has proved to be the game's great strength. After years of renovation, the Cluedo mansion has become barely recognisable, acquiring a spa, a cinema and an observatory. It has gone interactive, online and on the iPhone, all of which has helped keep what is essentially the same game alive and kicking in a global industry.
And the sales and royalties from Clue, as they call it in America, were far greater than the sales of Monopoly in the UK. And that helped us to keep Monopoly in the end anyway.
The 1950s was the heyday of the board game in Britain. In an age of austerity and ration books, bomb sites and superpower rivalry, Games Britannia retreated into the safe and frugal haven of the nuclear family and home. Television was still a rarefied novelty, and given the return of leisure time after the war, the nation got out their board games in their millions. A newcomer arrived from America to rival Monopoly and Cluedo and quickly became a family favourite. This was the third in Games Britannia's holy trinity of board games, Scrabble.
Word games have always been popular. In the 19th century, you would write your letters on tiles and you would play anagrams by just shuffling them around on the table. Scrabble was popular because it was the first word game of its type in which you actually placed pieces on a board. So the idea of having particular squares which are of greater value than others, that may in part have been inspired by Monopoly. The fact that it's not just moving tiles around on a table was so novel that it gained the attraction and the popularity it did.
Come on, Dad. All right, don't rush me. Is there such a word as ig?
Ig? I don't think so.
I'm sure there is. I think it's the word from which the diminutive igloo is derived.
There's no such word.
That's what you said about ab. Pass me that dictionary, will you, Mother? Hang on. Yes. This is what I was thinking of. Yes, this is the word I meant. Igbo.
Igbo?
It's a variation of Igbo, the language and tribe of southeastern Nigeria.
And then along came television.
Women, please. Women? They're always good for a laugh.
TV threatened to destroy everything. It sat there in the corner, the one-eyed monster, holding us in its thrall. And it played games too.
Do praise. 50. No.
The game show became a staple of TV.
Bonus of 20 coming. What man has been shared by all these women? Fernande Olivier, Olga Koklova, Sylvette,
St Hilda's Evans.
Picasso, 10 points, St Hilda, 30 seconds to go. Your bonus.
Why go through all the bother of taking a game out of the cupboard, setting it out on the carpet, reading through the rules again, arguing over who goes first? Why go through all that when you could watch someone else do the work?
Hello, welcome to another first-round encounter with some of the finest brains in Britain's universities.
But one board game eventually appeared that could compete.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Hello and welcome to Trivial Pursuit. Yes, at last, the sensational board game is on your screens.
Trivial Pursuit was the game that took on TV by copying it and then even conquered it, if only for a season or two.
Where do Walloons come from?
That would be Belgium. It gave everyone a chance to be quizmaster and everyone else an opportunity to show off how knowledgeable they were.
Whose famous last words were, "Is that thing loaded?"
Oh, I know this. No, it's gone. Its very title celebrated the idea of a superficial age, skimming the surface of knowledge without having to plunge into the depths.
1, 2, 3, 4. You go.
Oh, S&N.
S&N. What's S&N?
Science and nature.
Right.
Oh, God, it's so simple. What is a female swan called?
What is female swan called?
You don't know?
Yeah, no, I do. It's just it's stuck in the back of me my brain there. Can you give us a clue?
3 letters. Hey, come on now. There's nothing in the rules about clues.
All right. It's a female swan, 3 letters. Wait a minute. Got it. It's a bick.
Trivial Pursuit was part of a transformed world. Independent publishers began to get gobbled up by global conglomerates. Waddington's was taken over by Parker Brothers, Spears by Mattel, then Parker Brothers and Milton Bradley were themselves taken over by the biggest of them all, Hasbro, the brains behind Mr. Potato Head and the company that now has a near monopoly of all the best-known brand names in the games board world. The old favourites were now everywhere. There was Arabic Monopoly, French and Dutch Scrabble. Games were global, American multinationals ruled the board. But the spirit of creativity and enterprise was not quite dead in Games Britannia. What had once been a world-leading business turned into a cottage, or rather council flat, industry. and 1,000 board games bloomed.
They've arrived at last. We're waiting about the last 3 weeks to see these.
What else?
This is Quiz Wrangle, the actual production set. Come on, I can't wait to get hold of one of these. Object of the exercise is to get 3 men into the red. Very topical these days.
This was the late 70s, and the promise of the future was our native inventiveness. A vision emerged of independent designers producing clever new games which would be published by small, nimble companies. And the vision was apparently becoming reality. In 1979, 2 friends, Brian Taylor and Peter Forbes, found themselves sitting here beneath the Albert Memorial in Kensington Gardens. It was a time of deep recession. Taylor was an out-of-work artist and Forbes a former salesman of security peepholes. Both of them faced an uncertain future. Neither of them knew what to do with themselves next.
According to one version of the story, as the two sat there gloomily pondering their fate, staring at the ground, one of them noticed the pattern of the paving stones and had a flash of inspiration. Why not invent a game based on geometric patterns? The result, after a couple of years of development, was this, a new board game called Kensington in honour of where it was conceived. A minute to learn, a lifetime to master, it boasts on the cover. Quick to pick up, slow to put down.
Is it going to turn into a game with World Championships?
It is going to turn into a game, certainly World Championships, yes. I mean, we're having a British Championship on November the 15th. And they are world champions
Are you getting
who are addicted to it already.
Mr. Karpov and Mr. Spassky coming to it?
It would be nice to think so, yes.
So this is Kensington. It's a very simple game, isn't it? I think we've both got a command of the rules.
Kensington was living proof that the spirit of enterprise thrived in Thatcher's Britain. The game was big news and its inventors were courted by television.
You win by forming a hexagon. When I say form a hexagon, that is to take control of the 6 points of a hexagon. That's the most important rule.
Newspaper reports claimed that amongst its fans were Omar Sharif, Roger Moore and Peter Ustinov. But does it stand the test of time? That's what I wanted to put to games historian David Parlett.
I mean, interaction in the sense of being able to move other people's pieces around is a key part of a successful game, isn't it?
Oh, it certainly is, yes. Yeah, if you haven't got the interaction, if what you do doesn't affect what the other player is doing, then it's not so much a game as a competition.
OK, I've just completed a triangle there.
When I wasn't looking.
When you weren't looking.
You're always doing it.
OK. I mean, I quite like it. It has to be said, slightly better than I expected. Because my expectations were quite low because the marketing was so good.
Yeah.
I wondered whether that substituted for a lack of gameplay design. But I think, it has its attractions. I mean, is it unusual for a game like this to come along and, as it were, sweep all before it for a while and become such a success?
No, I think it's really quite a common thing to happen. So every year there's a new company that's got 1 or 2 games or maybe even just one game. Somebody's invented it and is marketing it for himself and the company has disappeared by next year.
Kensington was a huge hit at the time, but is now firmly in the where are they now category, like those other great inventions of the Thatcher years, the Filofax and the Sinclair C5. Icons of inventiveness which turned out to be 9-day wonders, now dumped in the landfill of our collective memory. In any case, by the mid-80s, the whole board games industry was in peril, not just in Britain, but across the world, under attack from an army of alien invaders. Computer games.
Terry Nutkin, what are you playing on?
I'm playing with my Space Invaders, Johnny.
Are you Space Invaders?
Great fun.
You're getting invaded, are you?
Yep, and it doesn't help with you keep talking to me.
Doesn't it?
No,
You've got to concentrate.
I've got to concentrate.
There was a new kid on the block, brighter, brasher and noisier than a board, a few counters and some dice. But there was a saviour at hand. fantasy role-playing games, and the most famous of them all was called Dungeons and Dragons.
When did Dungeons and Dragons start in America? 1975, I believe. They are now a $22 million industry. It really is one of the biggest growth areas of the leisure game market. Very definitely so, yes.
I will stand in amongst you. You may hold a dagger at my throat if you wish.
Right, I'll take you up on that.
It was one of the biggest revolutions to hit Games Britannia in the 20th century, and whilst the fantasy element was new, its success was based on some very old-fashioned principles. It was derived from a specialist pursuit called wargaming, which had been around for 100 years. Here, players simulated historical battles with model soldiers on scaled-down battlefields. Dungeons and Dragons took this idea and incorporated the mechanics of classic board games like Monopoly by introducing a journey across a board driven by the chance element of dice.
Hit it. That one slumps to the ground.
Depicting themes from history, fantasy and science fiction, this new hybrid was the start of a whole new games industry, which today attracts an estimated 20 million players worldwide. Since the 80s, the fantasy role-playing phenomenon has brought a whole new generation into the orbit of board games.
At the end of January, the games makers come together at Earl's Court, London, for the first important trade fair of the year. Almost all had enjoyed their best Christmas sales in many years, and the surprise successes are board games, challenging video and computer games as bestsellers.
Even in the information age, board and card games have shown themselves to be amazingly resilient, as a visit to any contemporary games convention will show.
This fair is the biggest fair for board games in the world. We expect 150,000 visitors in the next 4 days. They come here just to play. You can see here more than 550 board games, and they want to try them all.
I don't believe that video games or computer games are really endangering the board game. Might even help the board game, because young people take a liking to playing games through, say, PC games, video games. Yeah. Once they get older, the urge to sit together to socialize becomes stronger and stronger. And so this then, along with the desire to play, almost necessarily brings them to board games.
But there's nothing particularly British about this booming industry. The companies are American, the games are often German, the sets are made in China and sold all over the world on the internet. Surely there is only one possible conclusion.
Games Britannia is dead. Or is it? Perhaps it's just gone underground.
In 2008, police raided a protest camp set up by environmentalists outside Kingsnorth Power Station in Kent. Amid scuffles, the police confiscated what they claimed were weapons the protesters were stockpiling in preparation for a raid on the power station. They claimed to have taken knives, chisels, bolt cutters,
And this, which must be the only board game ever to have been classified an offensive weapon because it included among the pieces a balaclava, for reasons which will become apparent.
Police actually seized it as a dangerous weapon. Prior to that, we had many problems with the establishment, if you like. It was very difficult to find companies who would work with us. High street retailers who would sell things like Where's Osama bin Laden, computer games about shooting terrorists, but this was a bit too... This suddenly didn't fit in.
Too political.
Yeah.
They say it goes beyond satire.
We're
not too sure where
it goes.
Where are we?
So each of us becomes an empire.
Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Each of us...
Like the Mansion of Bliss, almost 200 years earlier, War on Terror is another radical British board game. Like Brer Fox and Brer Rabbit 100 years ago, it has an overtly political theme.
Well, I mean, the aim of the game is to liberate the world.
Right.
Yeah, I mean...
how do you liberate somebody?
By destroying them and taking over their country.
It's global domination.
Yeah.
Right, OK.
But unlike anything that has gone before, it's an attempt to bring one of the defining British qualities of our age, satire, into Games Britannia.
Where did it come from?
Well, about 3 or 4 days before the latest Iraq war started, me and Andy were watching TV one night, quite shocked by the absurdities of what we were seeing, and came up with the idea of satirising the war on terror in a board game format. So I spin the Axis of Evil.
Blue. Super blue.
So Tom gets to wear the evil balaclava.
Marvellous.
And straight away he gets 2 terrorist cards from the pack.
Right then, you're hot in there. It's, I feel hot.
It's not like a didactic game, you know.
Yeah.
It's not set up to say, look, here's our politics in the form of a board game. Play it and listen.
Mm-hmm.
It's more interactive. It's meant to be like, okay, so through playing this, I find out that if I need to get ahead, if I have to get ahead, then, and the cheapest and easiest way of doing that is through funding terrorism. Well, that might be against my personal morals. Well, I'll do it because in this instance I can justify it.
Rubbish turn.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I'm going to build.
Do you imagine when people are sitting around after a few beers playing this game that they have these kind of discussions?
Definitely.
We
know
it, yeah.
Yeah, we've had contact from people serving in Afghanistan, haven't we? Basically saying through playing this game, it's kind of made me think twice about why I'm here.
Oh,
9. So he's killed the hostages by mistake, and he's got to pay 400 million.
Goodness. So, having invented this, what have you done subsequently?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a new game out now, published earlier this year. It's called Crunch, the game for utter bankers. It's where you take the role of the CEO of a bank, and it's whoever's managed to embezzle the most money and have the biggest retirement fund wins.
I mean, there isn't now a big British board game company. I mean, the Waddingtons and
they've all been now.
You possibly are the biggest British board game
Free part-timers.
And we're happy kind of being on the outside of things. I quite like that we're not welcomed into the fray so much.
No, I think this might be it. So basically, because I got knocked out, there's only 3 empires.
Right.
So 8 liberation points to win. So well done, Tom.
Right. Well done, Tom. Is there...
This, then, is where Games Britannia has ended up, where it belongs, in the world of cheeky, slightly tasteless, nothing taken too seriously satire. At the beginning of our journey through Games Britannia, we discovered in a Colchester quarry a game that may well have had a part in the struggle of empires in the 1st century AD. And here we have another game that plots out the battles that are shaping our history. It's as though both games, spanning 2 millennia, strive for the same thing, putting the world down on a board, simplifying it, challenging you to master it. The board is a map, a stage, a world almost, for the story of the player's own epic quest. What if you could enter that world? It's an idea that sparked a renaissance of Britain's gaming culture and is the subject of the final part of Games Britannia.